Go for it, go for it. I'm just saying I'm not finished yet. Search for it, swing for it. Discover the me that lives in yes. Stand for it, stretch for it. It's my time, imagine my best. Run for it, reach for it. Uncover the me that lives in yes. I know, yes I know. There'll be miracles wherever I go. It's not work, it's play. I can make magic today.
Hi everyone, welcome to Senior Nation. I'm your host, Phyllis Ayman, and you are listening to the Source TV radio network, WTSN Washington, D.C. We are indeed a senior nation with 100 plus million adults over the age of 50. And we are here to bring you up-to-date information about successful aging, healthful longevity, and what I call becoming a well-ager, to dignity, respect, quality of life, and quality of care for our parents, our grandparents, and our loved ones. We at Senior Nation will be your trusted voice for informed choices, meaningful conversations, and a vibrant life at every age. Though the Source TV radio network is known for its dedication to bringing the highest level of jazz content to the viewing and listening audience, the owners of the network are also dedicated to bringing this important content to this fast-growing demographic. And I'm so grateful to have this opportunity. So let's begin with today's show. My guest tonight is Debbie Levinson, who is returning for a conversation on Senior Nation by popular demand. This week's conversation with Debbie is about resilience in aging, what it means, how to build it, and why it might be the most important skill you've been developing in your life. So I'm so thrilled to welcome Debbie Levinson here to the show again tonight.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
Yeah.
Yes. And what I'm going to talk about first is the capacity to be resilient. And then I'm going to give you some stages of life that Gene Cohn added to Erik Erikson's developmental stages. And I think it's important because changes start at age 40 and 50. And in the work that I do, I already see it in my patients who are talking to me about what they're looking forward to.
You know, I'm sorry not to interrupt you, but it just triggered a thought, if you don't mind. So, and I think I mentioned this to you the other day when we saw each other, which is that up to now, or I think maybe still a lot of people, you know, they just go through life and then they get to a certain point and they think, oh my God, they're an older person or they're aging. Maybe they're 60 or 70. They're just traveling their life's journey. And you and I spoke about this because I met somebody who just the other day who told me that she started to become very intentional about aging at the age of 40.
Right.
So
I'm going to begin with the capacity to be resilient. What is resilience? It's one's ability to adapt to change fairly quickly and easily. In fact, there is a gene for resilience, which I didn't know until recently. But if you don't have that gene, you can adapt skills to help you learn how to be resilient.
Can I jump in there? Because I did some looking into that, actually. And what I found, and you please correct me if I'm incorrect, what I found is that there isn't necessarily one single gene for resilience, but genetics can influence resilience. And that multiple genes are involved in traits that are linked to resilience, like emotional regulation or stress response, stress response and cognitive flexibility.
Well, why don't we do this, Phyllis? Why don't we have an overview of what it is? And then you can add these facets, because if people don't have an understanding of the ability to be resilient, then the details about it become, it can't be focused on as
Okay, makes
okay?
sense. Makes
So
perfect
in
sense.
other words, being resilient is influenced by one's developmental stage of life, the stage of life at which a trauma may occur, and it is also affected by factors of health, and lifestyle, who's in
Right.
your life, and the number of roles one plays. It's also influenced by culture,
Right.
and habit, and experience.
Experience. I was going to
And
say
it's
experience.
also influenced by the amount of financial resources one has relative to the financial resources you had before the trauma. In other words, it's the ability to make change, which is confirmed by many people that is not easy. And I've lived in multiple places, and it's interesting to see who can make change.
So my question is, wait, I have a question, and that is because you referred to trauma, which we talked about the last time you were on the show. How do those factors how are those factors affected by aging as opposed to a specific trauma response? How is that affected by the aging journey?
First of all, it depends on when a trauma occurs. And when a trauma occurs, as I said the last time, frequently, if it's loss of a spouse, the person is numb and in shock to protect their ego for a period of time. So change may not take place dramatically until a later point. But the point here is that if a trauma occurs, if someone loses a spouse, then they have to make a plan, because their life is going to change.
Right.
How is it going to change? And as you go through multiple phases of one's life, and certainly we have lived in a world with lots of interesting happenings in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And particularly the concept of COVID and the change that it imposed upon people and their lifestyles, you have to be able to make a plan to adapt. And as you get older, it's very interesting. What I see is people who have had to make changes early in life find that it's not as hard to make changes as time goes on. Older couples that I see who did not have that experience until much later in life find it more difficult to make those adaptations.
So let me ask you this question. Because, okay, so if people had the need to, if they've confronted more challenges and they've had to be resilient, what you're saying is that later on, they'd have the resilience as they age. They more easily be able to be resilient as they age, as opposed.
What I'm saying is, and I'll use myself as an example, I was widowed the first time at age 45. And I had 2 teenage sons, and I had to build a new life in a really conservative community. It was not simple. And I have one of the things that helps resilience is if an individual has the inner push, which Gene Cohn refers to in his book, The Mature Mind. And an inner push is really drive. And I'm driven. I just happen to be a person who inherited my father's trait, and I'm driven. So I was always looking to create something that would make things different. So I knew what happened when my spouse died, and I knew I needed to create a new life. I didn't know what that was going to be or how. And
Do you want me to read this or do you want to finish
Sure,
your
go
thought?
ahead.
So Knessa says adults in their 60s reported higher levels of resilience compared with people in their 40s and 50s. Please
That's
comment.
because lots of times people in their 40s and 50s, from my experience, are having maybe their first incident of trauma that they have to adjust to. And secondly, people in their 60s have already learned the experience. It may take them longer in their 40s and 50s to make that change and to adapt. And part of the reason I said that is that I'm now in the third chapter of my life. The second chapter was having a significant other for 27 years, and my life changed. And I had to move back east from the West Coast from a lovely area, and I had to start all over again. And I moved back east to New England. I'm now living in Westchester, and I had never lived there before, and I didn't know anyone except my adult children who live here, and I had to begin building a life. I am a very excellent networker, and I found that I was able to do that based on the experience I had from other situations and also other kinds of experiences that people have where you find social relationships.
Right.
So let me begin to tell you that the other thing that I found that was really very surprising to me, I knew I had, first of all, I have a career and I am still working. And so therefore I feel very productive and I don't feel marginalized as many older people do feel. Secondly, I realized later in life that I had all these feelings, but it wasn't documented as to where they were coming from. And when I read Gene Cohn's material, I realized that people later in life use their wisdom of life experience
Right.
to help them grow and develop. But in
So,
but in
so,
addition to their
go ahead.
wisdom of life experience, they have, um, there is documented now, which we didn't know years ago, that older people do have new brain cell growth. And it was thought that brain cell growth stopped when they were in
Right.
their 40s and 50s. And that is not what
Not
happens.
correct. So Jesse says, how is resilience related to socioeconomic status and education? That's a very good question. But
Well,
I just want to touch on something you just said, which I think is so crucial. And that's part of what's important to me and what I'm passionate about, which is about the wisdom that we have, at through the years that we've lived as a result of our experiences. We all have different experiences and wisdom from those experiences, and that not only are they important, we can draw on them as an individual for our own person, right, for our own resilience, but how the benefit that society could have by valuing older people and their contribution in helping other people understand how to be resilient.
but you have a problem because
Yes.
the United States has always been known as a youth-oriented
Correct.
society. And whereas in China and Asian populations all over have much more reverence and respect for the older population and the wisdom they can offer.
Correct. And that's
It's
my
not,
whole passion. That's my whole platform, my whole passion.
but
How can I impact that?
that doesn't happen here. And the reason it doesn't happen here is because we're in a society that doesn't value older
Correct.
people, and particularly they marginalize them. They don't assume that older people can have a contribution to make.
Correct. But so if you don't mind answering what Jesse asked, which is how is resilience related to socioeconomic status and education?
Resilience is related to socioeconomic status and education, in the fact that I had mentioned before. It depends on the financial resources you had before the trauma and what you were left with after the trauma. And this is related in cases where frequently people who get divorced frequently have less resources than they had before a divorce. Or what you also have is, if people have resources, they can depend on them. But the educational level that one has usually gives one many more opportunities to make different kinds of choices later in life. And what we're having now is really very new. People are living much longer.
Absolutely.
And so they can tend to be productive well into their 90s. And that's something very different. Our society has not even begun to deal with the productivity that people can have later in life.
Right. And wouldn't you say that being productive and having and living purposefully is an important ingredient in being resilient as you age?
Well, I'm going to give you, that's true. And I'm going to give you, I'm sorry this isn't in color because I have it on the screen, but here's a picture saying that all new vistas are to be explored.
Right.
Let me give you, and these pictures were all taken in Aspen, so they're really gorgeous.
Right. They weren't taken in urban environments, right? With skyscrapers.
Psychological resilience is the ability to cope mentally and emotionally with a crisis and to return to pre-crisis status quickly. The capabilities that the resilient person needs to display is competence, confidence, connection, contribution, coping, and control. And when you first have a trauma, you're not in any position to deal with those psychological activities. And as I said before, the inner push, the drive to utilize outside resources to help. I remember when I was first widowed, the neighbor across the street from me, who was also a very bright woman, said to me, "So let me ask you, how do you do this? How do you adjust to being a widow?" And I said, "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." But that's where I am. And it was a matter of exploring many kinds of uncharted waters and creating adventures that you could learn. I remember the first adventure that I had was very interesting when I was widowed. My oldest son was about to leave for college, and I felt it was important for us to have a family trip to regroup and to get connected as a family of 3 instead of 4. So I made a trip to go to Canada. I was living in Maryland at the time, and to go to Canada. And we went to Montreal and Quebec, and we did different activities. And what is important about the activities is that we all made joint decisions. And in Quebec, we went to a lake in the Laurentian Mountains. And I had gone on a lake when I went to summer camp when I was growing up.
Me too.
Maybe
we went to the same camp. No, I'm only joking.
I was much older then, but I decided that we were all going to do water activities. And one of my sons did water skiing, another one did some kind of boating, and I did a sunfish. I had not done a sailfish in at least 30 years. But what was interesting was my inner thought. My inner thought was, you can't let something happen to you. You're the only parent your children have left, and you must be safe, but you must also explore. So I explored the lake and had a fabulous time and felt so accomplished at the end of that experience. And that was what was important, is that
So,
I've had new vistas.
so interestingly enough, it reminded me of a gentleman I was coaching a couple of years ago. And I thought this was took a lot of self-awareness and insightfulness. And I would ask you, when I'll tell you the story, I would ask you if part of being resilient is having the ability to really be self-aware and introspect. And
Well, I
so,
just said that's what you
so
need to be, is self-aware.
so this particular I thought this was phenomenal, to be perfectly honest. So he was a rather large gentleman, and his wife was also quite large, and like I said, she had passed away. And I was working with him on reducing his size, I'll say. And he told me that he was aware of how much he missed um, intimacy and physical contact. And so what he decided to do was he enrolled in one of these, here I think they call it Massage Envy, in one of these places, and he went for monthly massages so he could have some sense of physical touch and experience that, because he realized how much of a loss that was for him not to have that. And I thought that was tremendous, to tell you the truth. I don't know how many
Well,
people.
one of the things that I did or encourage people to do is to get a massage, because
Right.
the touch and the feeling that I think is so important, and also to do activities that they had never done before. One of the most important things, and I see this question,
Right.
resilience is compromising three components: commitment, control, and challenge. I always encourage people to take up an activity that they never did before the trauma, and to try uncharted new adventures. Like, here's a picture of someone um, going on a river and
I don't
going
know if
down.
we could see that so well.
Yeah.
Hold it. Can you hold it a little further away?
Can you see it now?
Oh, I can see it now. Uh-huh.
Okay. And so I think this is very important. One of the things that I did the first summer was I learned to play bridge. And it was a very social activity. And it allowed me to have social interaction with people, which was wonderful. The skills of a resilient person is self-awareness, mindfulness, and that's
Right.
very important. Self-care, positive relationships, and release of tension, release of this. I had someone I work with who told me they went away this weekend to get away from all the intensity of everything they're dealing with, and they had 48 hours of silence. She said it was absolutely rehabilitating.
Mm.
You emerged from that as feeling totally able to re-engage. I have a question here. I live in China. Youth is now to dominate China. Young people in factories make much more money than their parents and grandparents working for the state. They dominate households. Confucius is dead.
Right.
Reverence for elders has broken down for the past 20
So I'd
years.
like to comment on that as well, because I've done I've done some research on exactly what's happening in different countries as the population is getting older, and in China especially, where younger people are moving more to the cities because that's where the work is. And obviously the older people are remaining, in the countryside. And maybe this person can uh, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I remembered reading several years ago, but they actually had to pass a law in China that you should go visit your relatives at least once a year. You got a week off from work to go visit your relatives once a year to check in on them, and that it was also your responsibility to help care for them. And that is because it has broken down, because the aging population in China is increasing just like it is around the world. And, it is problematic. As a matter of fact, I remember reading not too much about it, but that in China, as well as in some other countries, they're starting to develop nursing home environments because people need care and the families are so dispersed, there's nobody to care for the older people. And unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, in a lot of the cases, they're using the model that we have in the United States. That's a whole other conversation. But yes,
Okay. So
right.
I'm going to go on to tips to improve resilience. Get connected. Do not let yourself be isolated. Build strong, positive relationships with loved ones. And if family is not there, build with family by choice. Friends can provide you with guidance, support, needed acceptance in good and bad times. And friends, your peer group may have more available time than adult children with young families, which are overloaded with stuff. Learn from experience, remain hopeful, and take care of yourself and be proactive. And what is important about these things is skills of resilience is having vision, composure, tenacity, reasoning, collaboration, and above all, good health.
Right.
Because if you don't have your health, you have nothing.
Right.
But what is so important, I think, in all of this is the fact that when you face trauma, you have an opportunity. What you do first is you tread water and we have the reestablishment of
No, keep your thought. I'll read it. It says, you mean that a
wait,
person who is
I'm not ready for you to read it.
okay, sorry.
You reestablish a routine that you didn't have before, and you need that routine to be able to make decisions going forward.
Okay. You mean so Chuck says, and I have a comment on this actually. You mean that a person who is asocial cannot be resilient? Really? I wouldn't
Didn't
say
say that.
right, and I wouldn't say that either. We just, I think we're both agreeing that an important ingredient of being resilient is having connection with people, whether it's a social connection, family, faith connection. That is an ingredient, but of course, that isn't the only ingredient. And I would like to add, to tell you the truth, that to be able to ask yourself this question, what is important to me? What can I contribute? What story am I going to continue to write for the remainder of my life, for whatever age you are, whether you're in your 60s, your 70s, your 80s, your 50s? What is the story that I'm writing, and what am I contributing? Because as we said, purpose is an important ingredient of resilience.
Okay. Resilience helps us maintain balance in our lives during difficult or stressful periods, and it prevents us from developing mental health difficulties, including serious depression.
Right.
Now, the most common factor for children to have resilience is consistent, stable support from at least one parent, adult, or supportive caregiver. A nanny can very frequently be the equivalent of a mother. So, in summary, the types of resilience are personal, psychological resilience, emotional regulation, managing strong feelings and impulses, cognitive flexibility, thinking creatively and adapting to change. And you need time and space to be able to do that.
Right.
Optimism, maintaining hope and a positive outlook, self-efficacy, believing in one's own ability to handle challenges, support systems.
Wait, before you go on to support systems.
Wait, let me finish the last piece.
Oh, okay.
Support systems relying on strong relationships and community. There's physical resilience, the body's ability to recover from illness, injury, or physical stress. And then there's community and societal resilience, how groups and organizations and societies bounce back from trauma.
Right.
Earthquake, remember the fires in
Oh,
California?
yes, absolutely. I know several people who lost their homes, several people who lost friends. I was just wanted to go back to something you said about mindfulness, because it is an important ingredient in all of this. And it goes to it speaks to self-awareness, but it speaks to being present, being not only self-awareness, but being aware, connecting with how you feel in the moment, how you feel about a situation, and that is about self-awareness. But mindfulness is really an important ingredient in all of this, being able to
But
be present.
mindfulness frequently refers to getting in touch with it being able to do really almost self-hypnosis, to be able to do calming kinds of activities to get to be able to become self-aware. You can't do that unless you can concentrate, unless
Correct.
you can think clearly. And when you have real space and energy, you can become creative in a way that you've not been able to become creative before.
So you said something a minute ago about somebody who went away for the weekend, or and was away from a lot of the, I'll use the word tumult, a lot of the chaos, a lot of the noise. And when I have a course on resilience, I think I told you, and there's an expression called take a shot. So people who are Jewish, of the Jewish faith, and who are fairly observant, they don't use any devices or telephones or anything from Friday night to sundown to Saturday night, and on high holiday, whatever their high holiday is. And it's so there's something called taking a Shabbos break, because it's Shabbos is Sabbath, it's Saturday, and in a way, that's what you're describing. Social media, it's bombarding us all the time. And not only that, it's addictive. And talk about the antithesis of mindfulness. You're not even in yourself. You're scrolling, you're attached to this device. You're not connected really to anything or anybody except this device here. And whatever information or whatever you're seeing about other people's lives, which sometimes can bring you down yourself, because it's accurate. So I would say that that's a very important ingredient, is be able to put your phone down, or put it away, or put it in a drawer.
It isn't a matter of that. If you live in New York City, the intensity of the noise, the intensity of the interruptions, it doesn't stop. I know.
Right.
I go there to see patients for the day or the week, and then I come back home to where I'm living in this quiet, lovely suburban community with the duck pond right and you can watch the ducks. And what I'm saying is, it's peaceful.
Right.
And the quiet allows me to think in a way that I can't think when I'm in the midst of all of the other stuff, including social media. In addition, when we were talking about resilience, I want to give you another part of the summary that I think is interesting. We have ecological and environmental resilience. And what I mean by that, we're working very hard to get our environment back to a place that is healthy and that is good. I know a man who won the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for his work in the environment. He cleaned up the Hudson Bay. He's part of the Santa Fe Institute, and he's a professor at Princeton, has his own unit. And what is important about that is he's a mathematician, and he trains people to use math models to clean up the environment. And of course, his dilemma was he had to learn social, political, and economic elements in order to get the money to fund these projects.
Mhm.
But it's not just individuals that need to be resilient. Our environment is being resilient. There's a man in Texas who was a major hedge fund person who earned a ton of money and then decided he was going to buy land in Texas and grow trees and increase the environment and make it better. So there are all kinds of ways that people are resilient.
Well, would
The
you
key,
call that?
wait,
Well,
wait,
I have
wait, 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 wait.
I have a question.
Let me just finish this. Key factors that build resilience are strong relationships with families, friends, and mentors, sense of purpose and meaning.
Right,
And that's what people don't have when
right,
trauma first takes place.
right.
Healthy coping strategies, exercise, mindfulness, journaling is another way. Access to resources, access to education, healthcare, and shelter. And finally, positive self perception and self compassion. Many times, when people are married and lose a spouse, part of their identity is gone.
Right,
They have to rebuild that piece.
right. But what I was going to say was about the gentleman who was the hedge fund who now decided to build trees, that also people want to find at a certain stage of life. Some people call it the second wave. I've heard people call it the second act. I call it the third act. And that is that they want to go off in a different direction. They want to leave what they were doing that maybe was their major professional life, and they want to go off and do something that has more meaning or impact, like you say, in this particular gentleman's case, for the environment or for something else. Mohammed says, this is professional nonsense. I had no family, I had no familial support. At the age of 5, I was raised on the street. I had no friends that I could count on. I was shot at age 12. I had only me. It's not resilience, it's endurance. And this is very different. So I'm a doctor in California and I remain single and always dependent on myself. I'm 61 years of age and neither look forward or backwards. There is only today. Comments?
Yes. Endurance is resilience, period. I mean, you wanted to survive and you found ways of surviving. I'm friendly with a woman who at age 3 watched her parents be put on a transport to Auschwitz. Her support, or the person that was next to her, was her 5-year-old brother. And they made it together. 5 years old, age 3, you don't have an internal image of who your parent is yet. And she's now 88 years old today and is amazing at how she made her life work and wrote a book about it. But what I'm saying is what you call endurance, true, it was endurance. I'm sorry for you that you don't have people around you that you enjoy being with. But you're a doctor. I don't know what kind of doctor, but you have interaction with patients, I assume. So you do have a professional interaction with other people, and you're not really just alone. Comments? You live each day. As I'm aging, I have to tell you, I've never had the opportunity in my life to do the things I'm doing now. And I am relishing each day to do what I do. And it also depends on where you're living, that you find it being a place that's conducive to letting you do what you do. When I first came back east, I was living in an environment that was not that. And I've recently moved, and it is the most gentle, welcoming, lovely community I have been in, and it's tiny. And I came from a metropolitan environment, and I thought I'd never want to live in a tiny place. And the more I'm here, the more I love a small community, and the people are lovely. So, and I mean store owners, I mean grocery stores, I
Right.
mean friends. Friends are lovely too, but I'm saying that.
You
So
know, I have a similar experience. I live in Connecticut in a small it's part of Greenwich proper, but it's a locale of Greenwich, so it's really a small area. And I think that you just hit on something that's important that I talk about a lot, which is loneliness. And you know, people, and we knew about this more during COVID, that loneliness and leads to, and being isolated leads to depression, actually has a negative impact on cognition, dementia, whatever. But you know, I find I live, my daughter lives about 50 minutes from here, my son lives in California, and I live by myself. But in this community where I am, it's just what you said. There are local store owners that I have a relationship with that I've known for many, 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 many years. Um, um, and that adds a lot when I think about moving, because I think at some point I will move from the place where I'm living, not the area, but you know, the house that I'm living in. I think about that. Would I want to move to a place that where there wasn't that kind of local business, where I would be able to develop those kind of relationships, because it really is, it's really kind of a nice thing. And so this person, this doctor, and I don't know if he has these relationships or not, but it's even the person in the cleaners who welcomes you. It's connection. It's somebody who recognizes you, somebody in the grocery store who says, I just had it today. I haven't seen you in a while. Where have you been? I said, I didn't need any groceries. Well, we missed you. I mean, it was just kind of a very cool thing, right? Mohammed says, I'm a neurosurgeon and I teach at prestigious medical school. And I resent the comment that I need people around me for support. I don't. The self is enough. The comment, physician, heal thyself. I have, thank you. I live happily in my mind. Okay.
I live happily in my mind. That works for you. That's
Right.
fine. But you teach, you have students, and you're a neurosurgeon. And neurosurgeons have a particular kind of personality. And so you have a life that works for you. And that's lovely. Other people need other kinds of supports or information to help them develop a life that works for them. And before we close up, I want to say Jean Cohn said that there are four distinct phases from 40s, 50s on until the end of our lives. Those four distinct developmental phases of later life are midlife reevaluation, which you're going to talk about next week, liberation, summing up, and encore. So from the 40s into the 50s, you do a lot of midlife reevaluation. Where have I been? Where am I going? What am I going to do? Liberation is in the 60s and 70s, where many people have an opportunity to do something different they've never done before. Children have left home, parents have died. There's more freedom to make different kinds of choices, and that's important. And summing up is kind of bringing that together. And when people start to decline in their health, that's when the choices and the options decline. So
Huh.
thank you for having me, Phyllis. This has been delightful, and I hope you've all gotten something out of this discussion on resilience.
I not only was it so informative, but I think you know, your willingness and openness to talk about yourself, your experiences, I think adds so much value. if you want to, if there are any other listeners or viewers who have a comment or a question, I would encourage them to, before you go, to add that. I appreciate the people who did comment and ask questions.
What I'd like people to do is those of you who have had a period of trauma and then resilience, to talk about that and to be able to give us those examples. I think they would be lovely, and it would be lovely to have those examples from your experiences.
And I was going to also say that, but I think I started off with this question actually, which is, because you talk a lot about trauma, okay, and I'm thinking of the person who may not associate something they've been through as traumatic. I'm not saying it isn't. They may not associate it that way. But nevertheless, being resilient as you age, I think is something important that people, I don't want to say need to think about, but how do you remain resilient, especially as you and I have discussed, and is a fact of life that older people are marginalized in this country, and they're marginalized, and they're not valued or respected. They're not valued and respected, and that in and of itself is impacts whether or not people are resilient as they age.
Well, I think the most important thing is, first of all, I use the word trauma. Usually, loss is associated with trauma, and people may not realize that. People may not realize that they have experienced a trauma until later on, when they have a different way of approaching the struggle that they have. And I'm aware of a conflict in the Middle East, in Israel, and I'm aware that people are living in safe houses every night, where bombs are being dropped on the missiles. And their experiences are, this is not a normal way of life for them. This is creating a trauma. This is creating a dilemma. I was just speaking with someone who was talking about a member of their family and the impact, the COVID and the isolation that teenagers experienced when they weren't allowed to go, didn't have normal developmental process of being with peers and developing interactions. That's a trauma. But the trauma doesn't take place until now, when they have to make up for what they weren't able to have. So if my using the word trauma misled you in different directions, I'm sorry. But professionally, that's the word that's used for that.
Okay, well, I thank you for clarifying that for me, and maybe for many of the listeners. And like I said, I hope the viewers and the listeners will take away powerful insights about their own aging journey and develop strategies so they can continue to age healthfully, gracefully, and purposefully. So thanks so much, Debbie, for joining me today.
And thank you, Phyllis, for having me. This has been a delightful conversation.
I agree.
Good.
So I'm pleased to be able to preview next week's guest, Jill Shepard. Jill is a dynamic personality and competitive athlete who launched a professional organizing business in what she considers her third act. And I'm interested in hearing Jill's takeaway from today's show and briefly describe how she approached her aging journey with intentionality from the age of 40. So I'm so thrilled to have Jill here with me today.
Phyllis, I really was looking forward to this conversation. And it's interesting with what I'm very ADD, so I get lots and lots of thoughts that are very cacophonous. So after all of Deborah's insights, and resilience is one of those things I think about a lot. Um, and then, she was also talking about respect for different generations, the way that older people used to be, there was a veneration of older people and the respect for the wisdom, and that's changed, and we tend to be a youth worshiping culture. One of my intentions, lifelong intentions, has been to pay attention to people who are younger than me and pay attention to people who are older than me and learn all of the things from all of the people, because and I think that has been part of my resilience, is that I find that, my children's generation and younger generations are wise and bold in ways that I never felt empowered to be. But I've always had this sort of fascination, particularly with older people. When I was very young, I wanted to volunteer in nursing homes and I wanted to hear people's stories. So I've always had this sense that there's a narrative arc to our lives.
Right.
Um, and I think that has informed a lot of the way that I have sort of made some pretty bold choices in the face of pretty traumatic stuff.
So interesting. So in all transparency, so I want to tell people, and we'll repeat it again when we have our show, how we met.
Yeah.
Because we are about 20 years apart. And we met at Whole Foods in
Right
Greenwich.
in the front door where everyone was coming and going.
Right. And I was walking out, and I don't know if you were walking out or in, but I commented because you had this great purple in your hair. And I had been wanting to put purple in my hair for a long time. And I stopped to ask you. Then you commented on my hair. And we went outside and just had this conversation for a very, very long period of time and connected over
Yes.
these very things about aging and the choices you make and adventure and being
Yeah.
able to explore who you are with a freedom that you
Yeah.
can't necessarily do the same way in your younger years.
Well, and one of the things I said to you, and as I walked away telling people about that conversation, is like, there's this funny thing. If you're a woman over the age of, gosh, really 30, but 40, and you have some funky colored hair or haircut, like we're some kind of tribe. Like we just see each other out in the wild, and you're like, oh, I know I'll get you. Like, this is not the first time it's happened to me, but I think also that's you and I shared this comparison, and it was the first time in my life I've literally had someone else from their own observation say my unique observation right back to me in the words I use, and it freaked me out. But one of the what you said, which has been my experience, as was that um when you have purple or cherry red hair, or you have something really really different about you, everyone from every racial background, socioeconomic status, like
Age, right?
you are safe. Like, I don't totally understand why people read it that way, but you are a safe person to everyone, almost everyone around you, except for a handful of people who get really pissed off that you felt entitled to do whatever you
Right,
wanted to do without
exactly.
like apologizing for it. There's that little tiny subset, but we don't worry about them because they're not our tribe.
Right. I want to say, when we were standing there, and we both had different takes on this situation, but I am going to bring it up because
It's
we
a good
were
one.
talking about loneliness and isolation. And that was
Yeah.
my take on the gentleman, who was clearly, when I say an older gentleman, he could have even been my age, but he
Yeah.
looked like he may have been older than I am. I'm 72. And he stopped and looked at us and enjoyed seeing us, enjoying each other, enjoying our hair colors, and and okay, what he said was a little peculiar, no doubt. It became very peculiar, but my takeaway after he walked away was, and he did talk about doing his own hair, different colors. He talked about that, and he was a painter and all that. My takeaway was that he saw us engaged, and he was lonely or isolated, whatever, and felt the need or the desire to connect with some people who, like you said, look safe.
Yes, totally. It's so, I love this about this because we each had a take on this. So I should describe the scenario. We're literally just standing, like we can't move because we're so like engrossed in this conversation. And right in the entrance, like, and everybody's coming and going, and we're like, we should move, and we step like 3 steps, and then we're right. And this older gentleman comes up and starts telling us stories about his life. And there was a moment of like, he's going a bit on and on.
Right, it
And
was.
it was so funny because we talked about it afterwards. You were graciously indulging him because I think you saw the loneliness. And for me, I'm turning 53 next week. And I've been working through some stuff, and I had this moment of, I see you and I can see that you really want a part of this, but I don't feel like I want to share it right now. So I'm going to fake a phone call because I'm kind of overindulging you. Like,
And I have to be honest, I even said this to you. I think the professional in me kicked in.
yeah. And the part of me that was like, no, I'm working on like being empathetic, but having boundaries. I'm going to do this right now. And I'm going to do it graciously with a fake phone call. Like,
It was really, really terrific. And then we went on to talk about, which when you come back next week for the conversation on Senior Nation, about how you became intentional about your aging experience from the time you were 40. And that to me was so unique, and it may be different in present times, but I think for most people, they just go along in their lives. It's
yeah.
routine, it's robotic. They take care of the kids, they go to work, their families, whatever. And then one day they wake up and say, oh my God, I'm 60.
And they don't realize that they've been writing a story this whole time without a plot, or maybe there was a plot. But it's interesting with one of the things that Deborah said. I was reflecting on, and she kind of touched around it, but like personality is a big part of that resilience when she was talking about being able to be self-reflective and a risk taker and all that kind of stuff. I think a big part of that is my personality. Like as I look at who I was even from the time I was a kid, I was always paying attention to the people around me and going, I want a piece of that, and I know I don't want a piece of that.
Right.
And that's just the way I'm wired. But also, like Deborah said, I mean, I'm also ADD as hell. So, and one of the things that's the irony is that I'm working now as a professional organizer.
That is
Like,
that is
yeah,
kind of it's counterintuitive to
it
say the
is.
least, because my
And you know
son
what?
has ADD, so I don't even know how you're doing that, but it's a good
You know what?
strategy.
But it goes back to, I say that to say that, like, I think we all feel or believe or have been told to believe that we're sort of stuck in our personalities.
Right.
But the reality is, as Deborah touched on at her very first comments, like, doesn't matter your personality. If you have an intention, you can build the skills. Like, I, as someone
Right.
with ADD, learn these skills. And that's why I teach and coach other people, because if I was naturally good at it, I wouldn't be able to teach anyone else how to do it. Like now I can because I'm like, girl, oh yeah, I've been there. I know how those piles happen because I have made those piles.
I
We're going to
think
talk about those
I might
piles.
have to hire you. I have to be honest with you. But it's interesting because, she started talking about this resilience gene and all of this. And while
Yeah.
there isn't a specific gene for it, I think some of us are more inclined to be adaptable than others, right? Some people, and it really is, it's personality. It's not like a specific gene
Yeah.
for resilience. Some people are more adaptable. Some people are more concrete. Some people are more creative. You have predispositions. So Mel is saying, there isn't one single resilience gene. Research indicates that genetics play a significant role in an individual's ability to cope with adversity. Several genes have been identified that influence resilience. That's true. He and I discussed this before the show, often interacting with environmental factors. These genes are involved in various biological pathways related to stress response and emotional regulation. I read that to him right before the show. We were discussing it. He has a PhD in neuropsychology, so he knows this very well. And, I kind of wanted she and I to go into that conversation a little bit, because I didn't want people to get this idea that there is actually in their DNA one gene that
Yeah.
is a marker for resilience.
Well, it's like everything's on a spectrum, I think is what you're
Right,
kind of saying. Like everything's on a spectrum. You have things that contribute to your resilience in certain positive ways, other things. And, where does it ultimately leave you in the spectrum? Right.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
And that makes a ton of sense. And that's where personality comes. I'm like such an Enneagram person. Can you tell?
Right.
Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think personality has a lot to do, and your personality changes over time. And we just have a minute left, but I was very shy as a kid. Nobody would probably believe that. I was so shy that if people looked at me, I would hide under my mother's skirt. Literally, I remember it. There are only a couple of people in the family that I even spoke with. Can't say why. I think later on in life, I understood why I was like that. Of course, there were familial factors. I mean, without going into that. And it's funny because as my hair changed color over time, and I decided to become a redhead, I wasn't sure if I was attracted to the red, or because of my personality, or once I became a redhead, then my personality actually grew into that. I think we lost Jill a little bit here. But we're at the end, and I'm so thankful to her for providing us with a preview of our conversation for next week's show. So please join me next Wednesday, June 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, when Jill Shepard will be here. And Jill just embodies everything that is a powerful exploration of the human spirit. So remember to tune in, comment, and ask questions at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the Source TV Radio Network. And until then, take care, stay well, and stay tuned.
Go for it, go for it. I'm just saying I'm not finished yet. Search for it, swing for it. Discover the me that lives in yes. Stand for it, stretch for it. It's my time, imagine my best. Run for it, reach for it. Uncover the me that lives in yes. I know, yes I know. There'll be miracles wherever I go. It's not work, it's